Maria Eagle.
Thank you. I begin by congratulating my honourable friend and member for Liverpool, Walton, for his superb effort in achieving this debate and for his incredibly powerful speech in opening it. I'd also like to thank the 140,000 people who signed the e-petition, which so strengthened the hand of my honourable friend when he attended the Backbench Business Committee to argue for time to have this debate on the floor of the House. This is a subject which is of massive importance to my constituents in Garston and Hellwood, to Liverpool football fans, to football fans generally, to the city of Liverpool and to Merseyside as a whole, evidenced by the fact that all Merseyside MPs supported my honourable friend's proposal that time be found on a votable motion on the floor of the House to consider the full disclosure to Hillsborough families, unredacted and uncensored, of all government-related documents, including cabinet minutes. The release is a matter of enormous importance to the bereaved families of the 96 people whose deaths were caused on that day and to the survivors of the disaster. I was one of the 2 government ministers who called for full disclosure and publication of all existing documentation relating to the Hillsborough disaster on the 20th anniversary of the tragedy in 2009, along with my right honourable friend, the member for Lee. The incredible show of solidarity and dignity at the Anfield Memorial, which I also attended that year, as well as the chance for justice, which interrupted my right honourable friend's speech on that occasion, led to the establishment of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. Both my right honourable friend and I were able to push behind the scenes in government to overcome some obstacles in Whitehall to achieve that, though in my view, Madam Deputy Speaker, the terms of reference leave a little to be desired. I hope this process, ably led by the Bishop of Liverpool, who knows what a dark shadow the tragedy still casts across the city, will finally bring everything that can now be known and every document that now exists, 22 years after the event, into the public domain, unredacted by officialdom. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her positive and clear commitment to full disclosure this evening? The Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister have agreed to the release of all documents. I think it's of enormous importance that Parliament itself votes to call for unredacted and uncensored release and publication of all government papers, including cabinet minutes and papers. I believe the Hillsborough disaster and the circumstances surrounding it are a unique case which justifies unique action, and I want to set out briefly why. The Hillsborough disaster was not an accident. It could and should have been avoided. It was caused by a failure of police control. That was the finding of Lord Justice Taylor in his interim report just 4 months after the disaster. Why then do so many people still talk of hooliganism? The South Yorkshire Police, Madam Deputy Speaker, failed spectacularly in their duty on the 15th of April 1989, but rather than admit it, they spent years trying to blame the Liverpool fans who attended the match and the victims for what had happened. This was an orchestrated, sustained and deliberate campaign to blacken the names of the victims and of Liverpool supporters who attended on that day to enable the South Yorkshire Police to evade their own responsibility. As a consequence, the Hillsborough families have had to endure one of the most disgraceful campaigns of official skullduggery, hostility and lies of any victims' families that I know. It began on the day of the tragedy, continued for years and even now has left families feeling understandably distrustful and suspicious of officialdom. The South Yorkshire Police's failure to accept responsibility, their ongoing efforts to deflect blame, which lasted for years after Taylor's verdict, means that there's huge misinformation about what happened, which keeps having to be corrected by the families. 22 years after the event, the families should not still be having to defend their relatives who died from the lies and innuendo that appears every time the disaster is discussed in the public arena. It's as well to remember one of the first things senior officers in charge on that day did was to lie about why the gates at Leppings Lane were opened in order to cover up their own culpability. Inexcusable police behaviour continued on that day. Police refused to allow ambulances which might have saved lives into the ground because they were treating it like a riot, not a disaster. They treated families who arrived on the scene to look for missing relatives as if they were criminals. They blood-tested the dead for alcohol, even children. But there was worse to come. South Yorkshire Police briefed the Sun newspaper that the victims had caused the crush and that fans who merely sought to assist the injured and dying were stealing from them, were urinating on them, vile and untrue smears which heaped appalling distress on top of unbearable sudden bereavement. It's about time we knew just who gave those stories to the Sun, and I join with families today in calling on News International to tell us. As if this were not enough, the South Yorkshire Police very quickly established what I have referred to in a debate in 1998 in this House as a black propaganda unit, which systematically set about altering police statements in an attempt to influence Lord Justice Taylor's inquiry into the causes of the disaster. My right honourable friend read from one of them. I've read all of them. This was no less than a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. One cannot read all of the statements, amended, unamended and annotated by police lawyers and police, and come to any other conclusion. It failed mainly and really only because they did not have time to complete the job, and unamended statements were sent to Taylor. Taylor then made his finding, but instead of taking notice of Lord Justice Taylor's clear finding and his equally clear rebuke, the South Yorkshire Police kept the black propaganda unit in place and simply set about persuading the South Yorkshire coroner of their story, preferring to try and engineer historical revisionism rather than face up to their fact that they were at fault and found to be at fault by the Taylor inquiry. And despite all of this disgraceful behaviour, the Chief Constable did not resign. The two senior officers in charge on that day were retired on medical grounds and with large pensions to avoid them having to face disciplinary action. No one responsible has ever had to account for the loss of control on that day or for the extended, quite despicable behaviour which followed for a period of years thereafter. Indeed, one of the members of that black propaganda unit responsible for the smears is a serving Chief Constable to this day, Sir Norman Bettison. No wonder the families are suspicious of officialdom. No wonder they don't ever quite believe that what they are told will happen will actually happen. No wonder they want Parliament to support them by voting today that they should see all documents unredacted and uncensored. I believe that a vote in this House for full publication will strengthen the hand of the Hillsborough Independent Panel in any discussions that it may have to have with the Government about ultimate publication of all the material produced to them, though prompted by the Government's reaction to the Information Commissioner's ruling that Cabinet minutes should be produced. This important debate will allow Parliament to make its views clear on a votable motion about what it expects to see in terms of disclosure. We, as parliamentarians, should take the chance to do so and to say clearly, we are with the families. They must see everything. There must be no more suspicions of sinister official manoeuvring to prevent the full truth of the disaster coming out. There has been too much of that. That is all the families want. We must help them to get it by voting in favour of this motion. Yeah.